This episode of The Unstarving Musician is powered by liner notes. Learn from the hundreds of musicians and industry professionals I've spoken with for The Unstarving Musician on topics such as marketing, songwriting, touring, sync licensing, and much more. Sign up for liner notes at unstarvingmusician.com. It's an email newsletter from yours truly in which I share some of the best knowledge gems garnered from the many conversations featured on The Unstarving Musician. You'll also be privy to the latest podcast episodes and liner notes subscriber exclusives. Sign up at unstarvingmusician.com. It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. This is The Unstarving Musician. I'm Robonzo. This is my podcast. It features conversations with independent music artists and industry professionals with occasional special topic episodes featuring yours truly. A glimpse into the minds of my varied guests, all intended to help independent music artists better understand the marketing, business, and creative processes that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Hello and welcome to another episode. How are you? Where are you? What are you wearing? Do I sound better? I hope so. I should mention, as I did to liner notes subscribers, that my recent experience with two different virus bugs reminded me of a dreadful moment in 2015 when I didn't put my health first. I went out instead and played 3 gigs. I said 2 to the liner notes subscribers, but it was actually 3, I believe, because I felt the burden of letting my friends and bandmates down, and that was a big mistake that cost me about 6 weeks. This is how long it took me to recover from what turned into pneumonia. So, lesson learned. If you are not sure you're healthy enough to play a gig or go to work, this is the moment to think of yourself first. You're unlikely to have the stamina for creative acts and acts of service if you are too sick to get out of bed, and one never knows when too sick to get out of bed can turn to something worse. So, take care of yourself first. Everyone will understand. Life happens. People get sick. Your goal is to stay healthy and stay creative. My guest for this episode is Julia A. Miller, CEO and president of Delmark Records LLC. She took that title in 2018, and that same year, Delmark Records LLC purchased Delmark, the oldest continuously operating jazz and blues independent record label in the United States. Delmark was founded in St. Louis, Missouri in 1953. Julia and company celebrated Delmark's 70th anniversary by releasing a couple of anthologies, the 70th Blues Anthology and a forthcoming 70th Jazz Anthology. In this conversation, Julia shares with me about her background in music and academia, the evolution of Delmark's business model, how labels can serve as business partners, and how musicians can best leverage their labels for business, the challenges Delmark faces as a medium-sized international business, the role of labels in music publishing, pre- and misconceptions faced by women business executives, the value of networking for women in business, the next 5 years at Delmark, and more. Shout out to Johnny Bergen for introducing me to Julia, and this was a cool conversation. I'm not sure it went exactly where I thought it would, but that was by my own doing. I explored what I hope you will find educational. I'm sure you will, actually. It was super educational for me. So I guess without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Julia A. Miller of Delmark Records.
Johnny Bergen. Yeah. So Johnny and I, at Delmark, that's how I met him initially. Although we do have mutual friends going back a long time. So it's kind of funny that we didn't meet beforehand, but yeah, I met him through Delmark.
Those are musicians, the mutual friends mostly?
Actually, one's a painter, Louis Achenbach. He's known Louis for a while.
Oh, wow.
And we worked with Louis Achenbach as well. He's a free, sort of a free improv jazz painter.
Wow.
Yeah.
A number of the songwriters and musicians I've spoken with on the podcast are artists in other mediums. Yeah, like mediums, painting and sculpting and other things. And for a few of them, it carried them through the pandemic.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think their artistic practice uh, sort of kept them going during the pandemic for sure.
Def-
Give you a reason.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Um, Something I wanted to talk about in our conversation today is preconceptions, but I bring it up now, even though I'd like to talk about it a little later in the conversation, because I had a lot of preconceptions uh, about you, not knowing about your history with
Uh-huh.
both music and Delmark and business and all these things. But
Mhm.
more recently, I have acquired a bit of background on you, and it's quite fascinating. Oh my goodness, let me see if I can find this. I want to mention it while we're recording, but I was checking out a wonderful interview with you that was done by, let's see, I want to mention this. I'm going to put it in the show notes too. Blues and News. Anyway, great stuff. I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes and try and not run through too many of the same questions. I'll direct people there to learn more about you. And one of the things prior to checking that out, I was curious about where your roots in music and fascinated to learn about things ranging from classical to circus music, guitar. Did I understand correctly? Okay, so I know guitar and ukulele. Do you also play clarinet?
Yeah, I did really seriously when I was up through undergrad.
Wow.
Mhm.
And you started playing guitar at a very, very tender age, between 7 and 8 years old, which is
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. So anyway, this and some other things I learned about you helped me make a lot of sense of how you ended up at Delmark. So I suppose I would like to start with the surprises or lessons that you've garnered since you became CEO and president of Delmark, based on what maybe your expectations were and the way things are actually unfolding.
Well, people ask me that a lot, you know. It's actually not an uncommon question. It's kind of a business
D-
strategy question.
Darn.
Sorry about that. But we had made a business plan, like a 5-year business plan, because really that's kind of a standard thing to do when you're acquiring a business. So you need to show that you have a strategy. You need to show you have a budget. You need to show, you have a plan that evolves. And 5 years is kind of a standard, window. And some of the things worked. A lot of the things worked actually from that plan, and some things didn't. And then, of course, the pandemic was in the middle, which threw things completely off, and changed the business model completely as well, sooner than we had intended. So Delmark LLC started in 2018, May 1st, 2018, and it's a separate business from the previous business, which was 65 years old. So this year, 2023 was our 70th anniversary, so it's 65 plus 5. So continuously operating, but that, the previous business closed on May 1st and our business opened on May 1st. So it switched in one day. Um, so that business was a really different business, than what we do. It's based on the same assets and it's based on a lot of the same materials, but the way it operates is completely different than the previous business. And that's okay. They're really, they both had their strengths, both had their pluses and minuses, but really completely different. We're a digital business. We're centralized. We have 12,000 tracks online now. We still release records. We are primarily a record label and recording studio, but our retail is not a store. So we don't, trade records. We don't buy other people's collections, that kind of thing. We are a record label that promotes our own artists exclusively. Um, so in that way, the business is really like focused in a completely different way. The previous business was, a, a retail business, and the label was a separate part of it, but it functioned to support part of the retail business. And that was the previous owner's real love was retail and collecting and trading. So
And I assume that, but I'd love to learn more about it, but I assume that the digitization of the business was, well, probably an urgency of it because of the pandemic, but something that you had in your plans was to capture revenue opportunity. Were there other facets of it that you thought of in the beginning or the planning stages, or things that have been a surprise just in that one huge part of the business, the digitization of the catalog?
well, I mean, we did plan for that. Yes. I mean, it wasn't a surprise. Um, it's a very large job, and it would have been a lot easier if we didn't have the pandemic in the middle,
Yeah.
because that really impacted um, our workflow. And it still is in progress because, of course, we had more than 600 releases, but it was essentially a paper business with a huge warehouse. And so there's a lot of information and a lot of material to go through
Oh wow.
and include. And we are all the time working on it.
How, I've been curious about this in the past few years, and forgive me, it's like I'm sort of learning about this or a novice on it, but like I, it came to my attention in recent years that like music artists who had a mass catalog at the time of, we'll say the Spotify explosion, even though that train the streaming and digital music train started rolling before Spotify, but
Mhm.
that it appears that they've really been able to capitalize on revenue opportunity by sheer volume of their catalog, and also doing some strategic things with maybe like compilations and live releases. So I'm kind of curious, and fill in any gaps of my knowledge, please. But I'm curious about the just from a business perspective, the long term, I guess, profitability of that part of the business. And am I on base at all with, yeah, that's a huge thing of our sort of long term strategy?
Well, streaming is all about aggregation. So when people ask me frequently, what is the function of a record label now? Why should I, work with a record label? Because there were um, so many problems with labels, historically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, First of all, we're nice people,
Of course.
and we're honest people, and we work really hard. But also, streaming is all about aggregation.
Mm-hmm.
There are different types of digital revenue. So, like an artist can do a streaming account, like one streaming account on Spotify. Okay. And of course, if you just deliver to Spotify, or even Spotify and iTunes or whatever, a couple of services, yeah, your tracks are going to be pretty low. You have one track or an album and it's delivered to one or two services and it doesn't get much promotion. I mean, that is what it is. You know, At, Streaming is all about delivering to all the services all over the world. And because it's digital, you can track that. And it's important to track it because then you are collecting your revenue. And streaming is only one way. So you track your masters, you track your publishing, um, and then you work on placements in commercials and movies and that kind of thing. It's really important to, if you're going to do that on the business side, to to really pursue all of the options. Now, and that's what a label does, and that's really what we do. A lot of artists are very good at um, their booking, and they're getting gigs for themselves, and that's awesome. But that's a different business, and it's one part of the business. But then getting involved in a sustainability and having your release work for you over time and making a wider reach in the world, and also getting feedback from that release, like reviews, etc., that's more than one person can do. And so even if you have a manager, which you should as an artist, it's still a lot of work. Now, a lot of people go about making their own business and their own brand of themselves, which is completely a viable option. And I get that part. It's depends on your personality and what you want, frankly,
Mhm.
and how directive you are, how organized you are, how much you like to work with a team or collaborate versus like you want to call all the shots. And that's something that only really the artist can you can only we can make for ourselves that decision. But what a label can do, if it's a good label and working in the right way, is become a business partner. And that's really why I wanted to get into the label side. One of the reasons why was because there were things that I couldn't accomplish as an artist on my own, even if I had a manager. I just really couldn't raise to the level I wanted to, or get, or even approach some of the outlets that I wanted to, without a business partner.
Another question popped up in my mind. Are there ways that you can share, with the listeners that artists can better leverage their label for the sustainability aspect of their business or anything else that you can think of? Because I would assume that some artists make the most of that relationship and some not as much. And just curious if you had observations on that or tips.
Well, look, I was a professor for 2 decades and an independent artist. I mean, I practiced a lot, of music. I performed a lot, spent 6, 7 hours a day in the practice room during undergrad and graduate school, that kind of thing. So I understand what it takes I understand the creative process. And that's a very, very devoted, focused thing. And some people really only want to do that, and that's completely fine. If you want to do more partnerships, if you want to uh, do anything in the music business, then that's a decision that you consciously have to make and be willing to partner and be organized about it. But that's the way it is with any business, and that's probably a big it's something that I knew, but it's really something, how to go about being a business partner is is something that I've learned, but it's also something that I've had to work on sharing my expectations with people too.
Hmm.
If that makes sense,
Sure.
it's about communication, and especially in this world, um, the music business is a digital business. It is. Now, that being said, you have to be able to be functional digitally. And if you aren't, then you need to have somebody who can help you. Like we work with a lot of older musicians, and I'm talking like 90+ year olds, okay?
Hmm.
And and we help them and we're happy to. It's totally okay. We do it. We work with them. We give it to and anything that they need. But we have to be able to come together and do it because that's the way the business functions. Um, and so, artists in this era have to be able to be organized with social media. They have to be able to check their email and respond.
Right.
I'm saying,
Sorry, I know, I know.
you know, and and that kind of thing. Now, that being said, physical media is something is definitely our love too. I mean, I love LPs, I love tape, so it's all about bringing the physicality and the tactile to it. Um, but the business side is digital.
Do you have you found in your time with Delmark and just as an um, performing recording musician, but especially in your time with Delmark, that there are some pretty common areas that musicians can look at to improve themselves as business partners, so that they can make the most of a relationship with a Delmark or whomever their label happens to be. And you kind of mentioned a couple, the proficiency on social media and just sort of being responsive. Are there other things, if you were to offer it, that people go like, okay, I can work on that?
Right. Well, following a budget. I mean, you know, you can't on the creative side, um, it's very understandable to want to shoot for the moon. We've all done it. And I'm being completely sympathetic in that side. However, you then can't like spend all your money and then come in and expect the label to reimburse you or pay for that with no plan to tour or no plan to sell or anything like that. Okay, then you should be like saving your money and taking out a loan or like getting a grant and having a grant subsidy fund your record, which those are also viable options, but it's a different option. I mean, the label is a business, and in order to stay in business, there has to be a give and take and a budget involved.
Do you ever find yourself steering musicians to resources for that kind of thing? I'm sort of thinking of like a local, not Better Business Bureau, but there's some like local resources in a lot of cities for learning how to do things like grants or apply for loans, and even more basics of just managing your finances. But do you guys have favorite resources that you tend to tell musicians to seek out?
We have sent musicians to Lawyers for the Creative Arts, which is a not-for-profit here in Chicago, which is very helpful. There are other resources like the Empty Bottle, which is a venue here, which does an annual tax preparation workshop for musicians, which is very cool. There's a lot of grassroots stuff that we participate in and that we, sort of highlight. But, Delmark itself is kind of a medium-sized international business. So it's not the corner coffee shop. And one of the challenges that we have is really working with businesses that are our size or much bigger. We work on international trade. We work on shipping and regulations and taxes and all this kind of stuff that's like major business info. And that's like kind of beyond most musicians' experience, and probably not something they really need to deal with, except maybe on the performing side, visas and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Wow. And probably because of your size, you get the size of the business, you get some additional challenges just because of the not mismatch, but the variety of business sizes that you'll encounter. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, we're the pretty small fish in a lot of ways. People
Mm-hmm.
think of us as a big fish, but you know, uh, when it comes to distribution and larger labels, I mean, we're not Sony.
Right.
Not even
Right.
anywhere. We're like Sony's, like the thread of Sony's pinky nail.
Right.
So
If you do not yet have a website for your music, check out Bandzoogle. It was created to help musicians and bands build their website and manage direct-to-fan marketing and sales. Bandzoogle has amazing design options, a commission-free store to sell music, merch, tickets, and more, plus tools that can capture detailed fan data for you. Try it free at bandzoogle.com. Use the promo code ROBONZO, ROBONZO, to get 15% off your first year. Recently I've been delving into the topic of publishing largely for my email subscriber base, and I'll soon put out a few things on the podcast and definitely on the blog. And of course, as I anticipated, it's a huge world, a huge world of information to try and figure out. And you talked about it a tiny bit, and I guess it's sort of been an evolutionary thing that labels are important to a part or parts, plural, of of the publishing part of the business, and I was like, I'm very superficially familiar with a couple of things that you mentioned with regards to publishing. I guess I would love to know one thing that I recall reading and writing about was with labels, and tell me if I get any of this wrong, and how it may be changing. Because one of my concerns is that everything is still so rapidly changing in music and technology that I share information one day and it's already changing. But um, is it true and still true, and is it a growing thing that labels are very, very helpful in this part of the aggregation process whereby you have catalog leverage with some of the big streaming platforms? And again, I'll use Spotify as the example because it's so ubiquitous, to be able to um, pitch music and artists and releases in the modern digital way as we used to, in the physical retail world. And if so, I suppose if you could talk about it in a way, of course, that musicians can kind of get it, so that if they are contemplating looking for a label that has interest in them and thinking about all these things that they think they have to do, but maybe this is or maybe this isn't something that they know a lot about. I'd love if you could elaborate on that facet of like the aggregation, distribution / publishing part of the biz.
Well, publishing and aggregation and distribution are three different things.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess they're kind of related, but they're not the same thing. So labels can be involved in publishing. I mean, labels pay mechanicals on releases, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But we also um, we give resources to artists for different accounts that they need to sign up for. I mean, they need to have a PRO. They need to be a member of BMI or ASCAP. They need to have their own publisher, their publishing, company. We recommend them to do that. For example, with some of the older artists, if they don't have their own publishing company, then we admin it for them, and we're happy to do that. And then that's fine. But either way, you need to have somebody that you trust adminning your publishing. Otherwise, it'll get absorbed by a larger entity. And by a larger entity, I'm talking like one of the majors. We'll just snap it up if nobody's watching it.
May I ask another question on that note? Among the publishing companies, do services provided by companies like DistroKid and TuneCore, do they count in this particular area where they play a publisher role for the artist, or are we talking about really doing something much more advantageous, or just a simple requirement that needs to happen so that I guess taxable income or income can flow through and be tracked?
Well, I am not going to speak to another business and how they operate. So, except that those services are business aggregators that are oriented towards individual artists.
Sure.
Fine. I'm not sure specifically what um, what specific services they offer, because we don't use those services because we have our own distribution and we work on a B2B level.
Right. Okay.
It's fine. They're both fine. But they're very different, and that's a big difference. If you don't have a label and you want to work with an aggregator, then it's better to have something rather than nothing. And some labels work with sort of indie distributors too. It depends, but that's not where we're at. We work on a B2B level. So we work like, intermediate and up as far as we can go. And we do have a representative at all of the streaming services, and we do playlist and we do pitch, and that's expected. It's a function of labels, and it does increase your income for sure. if you get playlisted in, to the extent that you get playlisted in, which services, etc. So it is something that labels can really help you with.
Great. Thanks for the clarification. Some of it was a bit of a reminder. It's so funny, the reading that I've done and a little bit of writing. It's just like, oof, you know, it's something you have to almost live to internalize the different working parts and the different types of businesses that there are. I really enjoyed the conversation that you had on the interview that I mentioned at the top of our conversation here, when you were being asked about being a woman business owner
Oh,
and the idea of preconceptions. And I would appreciate, and I would imagine that a number of my listeners would appreciate you sharing your experiences and insights and any, I don't know, learnings, advice that you have.
well, this is probably you'd ask about preconceptions and surprises that I encountered. And I think it's actually more that people are surprised by me. There, people do have preconceptions of what they expect, and my experience. And I actually have a really wide experience and a really diverse and deep experience, especially as an artist. And I consciously came to the business side for specific personal and professional reasons. Um, in terms of being a woman business owner, that's something that's very important to network with. That's something that has always in my artistic practice, but also in my teaching practice as an educator. I focused on that very strongly. For example, I was a professor in the sound department at the School of the Art Institute for 17 years, and for a long time I was the only woman in the department, or one that would then they would add a few, and then it would kind of ebb and flow. But there were not in sound that many women, and many students came to me and said, I take your class because I want to see someone I can relate to. I want to take a class with someone that I won't feel like they're condescending to me, that like I won't feel like they're insulting me, or that they'll be supportive, or that they'll understand if I make a mistake, that they won't, that they'll take me seriously and help me, that kind of thing. Having a role model was really important. So I did a lot of advocacy throughout my teaching in that regard. And it is still important because, there are more female business owners, there are more female professionals, music professionals, especially musicians, than there were. But in terms of executives, and in terms of music business executives, in terms of record label owners that are women, I can kind of count them on one hand. That's a problem because people do have a preconception. They don't expect you to be well spoken. They don't expect you to actually have the answers. They don't respect it when you have the answers. They ask you to get them coffee and ask you where the boss is. That kind of thing.
It's hilarious in a silly way. Um,
That's so hilarious, actually.
yeah, no, I'm sure it's aggravating as all get out, but it's just hilarious that people are so the way we are. May I ask when the teaching, what period of time was that?
I retired from teaching in 2019.
Okay, wow. I spoke with another academic and sound engineer, Susan Rogers, recently, who worked with Prince up until about the time that he built Paisley Park, up until
Mm,
about that time.
right,
And
right, right.
I almost feel like I'm talking like I'm hearing the same story, and here we are decades later, and it's a shame. Have you? And I'm sorry if please hang on to anything you had left in your head about the thread, but I'm also curious to know if you're seeing in this short time that you've been that this is, like come to your center part of your attention, how the world treats um, women-owned business owners in the record business, and you're about as niche down as you can be in a lot of ways with the business, the type of music, you're a woman, and everything. But have you seen? Are you seeing improvements by virtue of your reputation or anything else?
The most improvements I've seen have been with generational acceptance.
That makes
I
sense.
mean, that, older people have much different stereotypes. And
Sure.
some of the older businessmen are pretty cool, and some of them are still really not. That's a really tiresome thing after a while.
Can
But
you?
also, men in business, and this was a big learning thing. It's something I'm still learning. Big learning thing for me. I mean, business networking is, a very male thing. Okay, now there's in other businesses, there are different types of networking, and whatnot, but you know, people tend to hire their friends. So, and it's a fact, they do. And there's nothing wrong with that. You hire people you work with people and you develop relationships. But, so sound engineers, if sound engineers are primarily male, then, you know, it happens that more guys get hired because men hire their friends. And that does happen. It happens less with younger people, but it does happen. For women, it's really important to have networking possibilities and network to manifest networking with other women. Um, that's how the whole network grows. And so that confidence and equality is, a big learning curve for women, I think.
Well, thanks for that. I imagine that's even a bigger or truer reality as you get up in the size of business, and then depending on the industry. And
It's easier in arts actually because you just play. I think it's much more transparent as a musician, really, because you can play or you can't, you
right.
know. And I found kind of a long time ago is that, well, if you could play, then people would just listen. People would, you could do it. There were still doors that didn't open, but there were a lot of doors that did. So that's something that is really, it's easier in some ways. Business, it's much more social. So there are still challenges to overcome.
Do you think I can see that one thing you said is very important, networking with other women, and I assume that by virtue of the support factor in and of itself makes that so valuable. Do you think, or do you get to talk about networking in mixed mixed crowds, men and women, or with men specifically, or how to just to sort of navigate the weirdness that still exists in business? Is that a focus at all when I don't know, among your networking, your peers?
I mean, I do definitely join women's business networking opportunities, and I have produced the Women in Blues tribute at the Blues Fest, Chicago Blues Fest, the last 2 years. So that's has really pushed a lot of female blues musicians forward and given opportunities, which is great. So it's definitely a conscious effort for me. From the business side, there are opportunities to pursue. Um, it's more like actually making meaningful connections
Mm-hmm.
uh, with with people who are your peers, other women who are your peers. I mean, with networking organizations, are cool and necessary. That's fine. I'm not like business lady that goes to a women's business network, though. I mean, necessarily. I mean, it's not, it's not, if I was younger, maybe, or if I had a different track, I have a very specific kind of track. They're good and necessary. I just, I don't find myself there that much because I'm not really, even though I'm a C-level executive, I'm not like an executive. You know what I'm saying? It's not. I'm a president artist mom. All these things. So, it's not, it's a much more multifaceted kind of situation. But I think making the meaningful connections with women who are really positive and your peers is a very important thing.
That's great. Can you cite some, I guess, industry or ancillary types of events or organizations that you really like and try to advocate among your people, your peers?
Well, I mean, the Women in Blues, events and the tribute was a very important initiative and a very wide ranging. Um, and there are those kinds of events going on advocacy wise, not just in Chicago. So,
Do you think a lot of musicians miss the value of those type of events? And I I don't know why it was a surprise to me, but there's a young blues young she's younger than me, a youngish blues singer that I met in San Jose, California, who's based in Austin now, Laura Price, and she told me once in an interview that I guess it's the Blues Foundation Awards
mhm.
that I mean not her exact words, but like the most important reason to go there is networking. It's just invaluable. Do
Yeah, I
you
mean those award shows, those awards, and the Blues Foundation. There's the Just Blues Awards as well, which is another blues award. There, those are. It depends on you know what you like and your personality. There are a lot of independent musicians that really develop their own thing too. And also going back to what I was mentioning before, it really depends on you. Not everybody functions super well in a networking environment. It doesn't work for everybody, and
That's
that's
true.
totally okay. It depends on what you need and what you like. Some people really flourish in those kind of things. Some people really need to have their own thing and build it themselves.
That makes sense. That
Mhm.
makes sense. Okay, a couple bonus questions here, and of course, if there's anything that you want to add about the business or anything, feel free before we wrap up here. But I'm going to sort of steer us toward the finale of our conversation and just ask you some somewhat left field questions. And if you need clarification, I'll just default back to you and say whatever answer comes to mind. So the first one, just a couple of these, by the way. The first one is, what are you thinking about these days?
The next 5 years.
Spoken like a true businesswoman.
Mhm.
Is there anything specific on the horizon that you can share that is really driving that?
Well, we finished our 70th anniversary
Yay!
last,
Congratulations.
yeah, in 2023. And we had many events celebrating that. And we really got as many musicians involved as possible in all the different kinds of events. Um, this year, well, so we wrapped that up with a big show at Thalia Hall here in Chicago in December, which was awesome. Um, and several others too. We also had a show at Evanston Space, and we're going to be releasing that. We've released a couple of singles from that, and we're going to release a record from that. But what we're doing right now is finalizing our release calendar for 2024 and into the beginning of 2025. So, because we were focused so much on wrapping up our 5 year plan, on our 70th anniversary, and all of these large performing events, we didn't release as much. We also just had a lot of things to tie up, particularly, COVID business wise was still affecting us. It doesn't seems like the pandemic was over a while ago, but business wise, there's still, ramifications from that, economic ramifications, things like that. So we just wrapped things up, and now we're planning ahead. And it's really important for artists to understand that record labels and businesses work on the quarterly system. Okay, so right now we're already into Q2, which is April in terms of our planning, April of this year. So that means that we're like April and beyond at this moment, and it's the end of January, because that's distribution needs a 10-week window. They need a 10-week lead time. Major magazines need that too. So, you can't be like, okay, here's my record, put it out next week for me. Or in a couple weeks. If I do it now, can't I get it back in February? Well, no, because it'll die. You have to be patient, you have to plan, and you have to realize that it's a much longer arc. But because of that, you will reap more benefits. If you want to do that, if your priority is getting it out there and selling it at your gigs, which is totally fine, but it's different. Okay, if you want to expand your reach and get some reviews, get placement on playlists, get major magazine coverage, that kind of thing, then it's a much longer time frame. And that's what we're doing right now.
I like that. That should be helpful to people to know if they're not thinking about it, or a good reminder. Okay, and then secondly, this might be a fun question for you. And unfortunately, it's a yes or no, but I trust you won't just say yes or no. But do you believe in yourself more than you believed 5 years ago?
I always believe in myself, but I also feel like I'm better at seeing other people than I am at seeing myself. It's my strength and my weakness.
I get that, and I'm happy, delighted to hear about the sort of self confidence at the same time, and I can relate. I can relate to that in seeing in others what you may miss in yourselves, or maybe just don't admit about yourself in terms of your upsides.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we did pretty good. Did I leave anything out that you really wanted to talk about?
No, I'm all good. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I really appreciate your time, and it was a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. You can leave us feedback, questions, comments, complaints at unstarvingmusician.com/feedback. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you love this podcast, please visit unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor to learn about the many ways of showing your love and support. Your support does indeed equal love. The series music you heard in this episode is New Gods Part 2 by yours truly. Find links for all the places to hear the full version with vocals by yours truly at robonzo.com. Find links for all the people and things talked about in this episode at unstarvingmusician.com. Peace, love, and a whole lot of gratitude.